Dr. Jose Luis Zelaya, thank you so much for joining us on Highest Aspirations.
Thank you for having me. I am honored to be here.
It's an honor to have you. I met you through my colleague John Seidlitz, who always has great recommendations for folks to bring on, and so I always kind of follow his advice. And I was amazed by some of the resources that he sent over to me. You had a TED Talk that I watched that was unbelievable, and then we chatted, and I thought, wow, this is going to be a really great conversation. So I'm glad that the day has finally come. Um, and I think it's a really good time to have this conversation as well for a variety of reasons. So let's get started. To say that the very least, you have an incredibly powerful story about your journey to where you are now, which we'll get to a little later. And I think with everything that's going on right now at the southern border, you're in a really unique position to offer some I think really valuable and important insight. So just kind of a little background, and you're going to get into this a lot more, I'm sure. But you fled Honduras after living many years as a street child and in absolute poverty and a situation you describe as extreme violence in one of the most dangerous cities in the world, which is well known. And after a 45-day journey, you were found on American soil by immigration officers. So I'd love it if you could sort of take us back to that moment. I mean, what were you feeling when you were found that day, as a way to kind of bring that perspective into the educators who are listening and who are working with students that have similar situations as you?
Absolute desperation. It's a desperation that completely takes control over you. One that it's filled with hope because you're in the United States, and you think that once you're in the United States, life will change magically because you don't know what a big city like Houston or Chicago or Seattle or New York tends to look like. You're just thinking about, if I can make it to the United States, life can be different. So once I'm in the United States and I crossed the Rio Bravo, it was painful because I was nowhere to find my mom. My mother was nowhere to be found, and that was difficult for me because I remember screaming. I remember being thirsty. I remember being upset, being worried, but also being completely tired. Like I had just had a journey that was, you talk about being on top of the train, you talk about walking deserts. I'm 34 years old, but I have 14 surgeries in my body, and that is part of the journey. So I remember whenever I was in the United States, it was absolute desperation to look for my mother.
Yeah, which is the reason that you came, and the reason that many children come to the United States. You share that story with a lot of others, and soon after that, you ended up, like many others as well, in a detention center before you were allowed to seek political asylum. So you talk about that moment and that desperation and that sort of confusing feeling of being on American soil and having those feelings that I think people can understand, of being thirsty, being tired, being just that feeling of desperation, not knowing sort of what's next. And then you end up in a detention center where things maybe are a little bit more organized. Though I'd love to hear your perspective. What is that experience like, and what should educators know about that experience, again, that are working with students who have been through it?
My experience happened in year 2000, so that my experience was very different than the influx that we're experiencing now. So I think that it's important to acknowledge that what I experienced was very different, because in the center in which I lived, there was maybe about 20 or 25 children. So we grew a closer community, we knew each other. But at the same time, what's interesting is that I was very grateful that I had a meal, that I had three meals. I was very grateful that I had clothing, and that I had a bed, and that I had a place where I was being treated for my wounds, my physical wounds, and people that were there to ask me how I was doing and teach me English and teaching me how to uh, solve puzzles and do various things to be able to take care of myself. But I think that what was not being taken care of was my trauma. What
Mm-hmm.
was not being taken care of was all the pain of seeing my brother passed away in Honduras, of seeing my father being abusive, seeing my mother migrating to this country, and then all of a sudden making it to a facility in the United States where people had this incredible expectations of me, where they needed me to be respectful and to be obedient and to be X, Y, and Z, while at the same time it was very difficult for me to express my gratitude. It was difficult for me to express my respect because of everything that I had gone through.
Sure.
So whenever I think about my life there, I was grateful. I just didn't know how to communicate it. I was going through a lot of pain, and that's all I could remember.
Yeah, you bring up a really important point, and thank you for clarifying that it was the year 2000, and obviously things have changed. And hopefully at this point, I don't know, but I'm hoping and I'm seeing it a little bit, at least that trauma, at least in schools, is being dealt with perhaps more than it was then. But I want to talk a little bit about that because, I was a high school teacher myself, and I started very young at 22 years old without much training. And I worked with students who probably were in similar situations as you, and that was, I started teaching at about 2000 as well. So it was about the same time. I'm a little bit older than you. And I, I, as a teacher, did not know how to deal with exactly what it is that you are talking about, which is students that don't know how to communicate the way that they're feeling. You mentioned the word disobedient. Outwardly, it looks like these students are being difficult for the sake of being difficult. And I know I'm using simple terms. What do teachers need to know about students like that? Teachers like me who are entering the classroom and who are facing classroom management, and I have to deal with, and how am I going to deal with this situation when I have so much else going on? Because I think that's still a major issue in a lot of schools right now. What do you want them to know about students like that?
That's very important to acknowledge, because as have the opportunity to travel the nation and to work with different school districts and meet the students in different areas, whether they are right now in detention centers, or whether they are in programs of arrivals, or bilingual education programs, or English language learners, or whether it's an event where they just graduated from college. There is one pattern and one variable that they all have in common, and that is that they are strong, that they are so capable, that if they made it to where they are, it's not because of chance. It's not because of a combination of luck, and therefore they are here, but they strategically created a plan that allowed them an opportunity to have a different life. So they are in schools because they see this as a transformational way for a change, not only in their home countries back home, but also for their families here, as well as their future families. And I think that that's the very first thing to understand that these children are capable. And if that is a challenge, or if that is in question, I am one of them. And I completed a bachelor's, an associate's, a master's, and a PhD. And I grew up in a trash field. I grew up among violence, and I grew up among unaccompanied minors. And I'm not an example. I'm only a sample of the potential of what they can be, and uh, what they are purpose in this life. I think that that's the first thing. And I think the second thing that is very, very important is to acknowledge the disconnect. If teachers believe that they are capable of understanding the experience of a child who migrates from places where definitions are different than here, then we will never be able to serve them properly. And this is what I mean. In the United States, absolute levels of poverty are defined as someone who makes less than $2 a day. In the United States, less than one population of its country live under absolute levels of poverty, because no one lives under less than $2 a day. However, in Honduras, more than 48% of the people live in absolute levels of poverty, less than $2 a day. And almost 2/3 of every person in Honduras lives under less than $5 a day. And that's data from the World Bank. So for an educator to think that they understand that a child is migrating poverty, but to conceptualize it from poverty in our own terms, is not understanding their own terms. So we must understand their own terms before they're able to understand ours.
Yeah. It sounds like both are a matter of understanding and empathizing. I mean, you started off by talking about we have to recognize how strong and capable these students are, and somehow that is missed. Somehow it's missed when you talk about somebody had to make a strategic plan to get to this country for that transformational experience of school, which you described as, which we'll get to in a second. and sometimes have to do it more than once to make it happen and go through these incredible challenges. And so they might have a strategic plan, but that might have to change over and over again in order for it to transpire and for it to come to fruition, which is the very example of what we want in people, the ability to make a plan, but when the plan goes bad, to adapt quickly. So I really appreciate you saying that. That's really important. And then understanding what's going on, in other countries. I think, there's the way to understand it, which you described, which is to understand what the student is coming from, understand the levels of poverty and not compare it to what's happening in this country. And then there's like the policy piece, right? Which I don't claim to be an expert on, but I do know that, if you look through speaking with people like Sonia Nazario, who's a journalist who wrote Enrique's Journey and has done a lot of research on this topic, that, the reasons that people are coming to this country are what you describe: absolute poverty, violence, difficult situations. So what can we as a nation do to understand what's happening in those countries? It's a conversation for another time, probably, right? But that, we could do a lot to kind of stem the tide if the situation were probably better in those countries, because I imagine most people don't necessarily want to leave their home countries and uproot everything to come someplace else. So as a way to kind of review what you said there, I know that was long-winded, but I really appreciate that. And I want to take it from the moment where you were talking about that transformative experience, school, right? That's the reason why people come. And so months after this detention center, you reunited with your mother and sister in Texas. You have this amazing story, which I'd love for you to tell a little bit. And then with the help of your mother, who you have, I know, incredible respect for, you enrolled in school. And that was what you described as a transformative moment. And it served as the moment where you start to build a new life in this country. So thinking about that, were you aware of that when you started school? And if so, was it like an intrinsic motivation that you had to succeed that comes with that strength and capability that you were describing? And who helped you realize that potential? I know your mother did, but others as well.
Yeah, and it was always there. It was there whenever I was 5, and I had to outsmart the other kid who was shining shoes. And I had to convince you, a person who lives under absolute levels of poverty, that your shoes need to be shined, even though you live in Honduras, which is a tropical weather storm, and it rains all the time, means that your shoes are not going to be kept clean. So
What
you
a great
understand all
example.
these things. And you understand all these things as a small child, and then you grow up and you understand, oh my goodness, like I need to survive in one of the most dangerous cities of the world. So I think that it becomes an instinct that through life, um, it begins to be flourished. But I have always believed that life is my greatest teacher. I have lost a brother. I have lost, my father, to drugs and violence, and and then I was reunified with my mother. So at one term, I felt like I lost a lot of things. So I have always relied on this concept of life being my teacher, my greatest teacher, because I always wanted to be educated. I always wanted to learn. But in Honduras, like, oftentimes militaries or gang members would come and fight in the schools, because remember, I was born in the 1980s. El Salvador and Honduras had just had a civil war.
Mm-hmm.
Honduras had just experienced also an internal, not a civil war, but a war between the two countries, and then Honduras had experienced a civil war as well. So then you add up all this violence, all this poverty to a child that is born in the 1980s. To me that was just my normal reality. So you grab all of those skills that I learned as a kid that grew up in that environment, and then you put them in an American school and you tell them to succeed. Oh my goodness, like, of course I will. Are you kidding me? Like, I have skills to know how to succeed in the most dangerous city of the world. I have skills to be able to sell, to be able to make money out of nothing. I have the ability to live in a place where there are hurricanes and natural disasters left and right. Of course, I would take advantage of an education. So that was already in me. Did I acknowledge it? Did I know it? Did I believe it was there? I think that what did it was also understanding the sacrifices of my mother and seeing how she worked, seeing how she didn't care. I mean, she worked 14, 15, 16 hours a day. For what? For $60, $70. For what? So that I could have a good backpack. or good books. So seeing that created in me a sense of anger, created in me a sense of like, enough is enough. But how do you do it but while being undocumented? How do you do it while not understanding the language? How do you do it? I did the math, and just working per hour would never do it. So I wanted to be able to honor my parents and honor all the sacrifices that were made before me. But to tell you the truth, did I know it while I was going through it? Ah, if you look at my school reports and you judge me by those, you would come to find out that there was a lot of behavioral problems. But you would also, what you will not find out is Mrs. Wright, Mrs. Gonzalez, Mr. High Note, Mr. Wallace, people that were there that believed in me and who empowered me. So those invisible heroes are the ones who made this visible.
Yeah, I was sort of expecting you to get to the point that you just got to. You clearly are a person, based on everything that we've just heard and what I know about you, who had that motivation. You talk about your childhood, and I love that story about shining shoes in a place where nobody really needs it, having to outsmart other people. There's very clear that those are skills, and I hear lots of people tell those stories. Those are survival skills that can help you in so many other parts of life. But again, it's that trauma piece and the stuff that you go through, and coming to a different place and being in school and looking at those things, those report cards, right? That are supposed to tell a story that in some ways isn't really true. And what is it that makes us surpass that, transcend that? You just mentioned the names of 3 or 4 what you call invisible heroes, teachers who guided you through it. Do you think that every student who has been through experiences like yours can list those 3 or 4 teachers? And if so, what is it that they need to do to motivate, though not to motivate, that's the wrong word, to help those students succeed using the skills that they've already built throughout their lives?
One of the things that I have learned is that trauma limits your ability not only to communicate, but also to feel, to express, to make sense of things. And oftentimes, when you come from a place where you're often rejected, where you're often ignored, where society sees you as a child and still says you do not deserve to be educated, you do not deserve, because of, again, right, because of the infrastructures are 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 not in place, or whenever they live in an agricultural space where electricity or drinkable water or just the basic human needs have not gotten there. And then all of a sudden you have a child that makes it into an American school where there are incredible resources, where teachers are incredibly trained, where principals, educational leaders have the desire to serve. And then all of a sudden there is this huge clash of emotions,
Mm,
huge clash of emotions. I can't even begin to describe it.
yeah.
Like you take there, the kid is used to being taken advantage of, and then all of a sudden there is somebody willing to serve, willing to help, willing to, and oftentimes the child himself or herself is not able to accept that because of that trauma. And that is where the catch is. Understanding how do you fix both? How do you communicate both? How do you help the child build trust when their own individual trust has been broken for so many years? Because the experiences that this child will never speak of, that's what the problem is. What we will never know of, that's what the problem is. We will know the data, but the data can only share so much. What about their true pain? What about their true sacrifices? What about the real things they experience that I myself have to oftentimes stay silent of? So that's where it's also very, very painful to be able to think about. So it's a plan to be able to help the teacher understand their experiences, but it's also to help the student understand that it's okay, that they're safe, that they're now in a space where they can go to school and not be afraid of gunshots, or not be afraid of someone is going to come in and kidnap them and recruit them into a gang, and that they're in a space where they can learn and that education can change their lives. So it's very different. It's very, very different to compare my experience to now the experience of a child that is now in the school, because I'm trying to go back to that moment in that space, in time.
It's really complicated, and I'm asking you questions, I think, that are almost impossible to answer for everybody because everybody's different. That's what makes it so complicated. But the way I look at it is if we don't begin to ask the questions, especially to people with your level of expertise and experience in these matters, we're not gonna solve them. These are hard challenges, and I'm glad that you're willing to talk about them. Okay, so I love this kind of. I'm throwing you some curveball questions here, just because there's some great responses that I'm hearing from the kind of trajectory of your experience. But let's go back to that. So you quickly became a dreamer, an English language learner, and a first generation student. These are all labels that we hear all the time. They're so common, but I'm guessing they mean a lot more to you. Talk with us about how those labels affected you as a student and as an adolescent growing up. And looking back at that experience, what do you think educators should know about what these labels mean to students?
Well, I think that there's identity. There's identity, there is culture, there is pride in owning who we are, and understanding that, for example, being a dreamer, for me, there's identity in it because I'm somebody who benefits from the Dream Act. I'm someone who benefits from the Texas Senate Bill 1528 in the state of Texas, and I'm also someone who has been involved in the activist movement. So for me, there's a sense of identity there into understanding that I'm not only myself, but that there's millions of us and that many of us have similar aspirations to honor our families. As an English language learner, I think that to me that's it's humbling and it's grounding because it allows me to understand that we're all English language learners in a sense. The same way that I'm a Spanish language learner, because if you put me in a history class and now you're going to teach me Spanish terms from the 1800s,
Mm-hmm.
you're now teaching me a new language.
Right,
So
right.
I'm always going to be an English language learner, especially as I have transcended into different levels of academia. For example, whenever I enter my master's degree, I remember my first paper that I wrote. I wrote it and I was so excited, and it was so many pages, and I was like, here it is, and then I remember getting it back, and I got an F. I got an F on my first paper. And the teacher called me into the office and she explained to me and said that she had given me an F because it was not academic writing. But instead, what she did is that she changed the rubric and she graded me for creative writing. And for creative writing, she gave me an A and gave me an opportunity to understand
Mm-hmm.
academic writing. So I think that understanding the different layers as I move forward, it's incredible for me. But also, it allows me to connect to an entire population and to be able to grab what I learned and to let them know how I got here. Because again, it is that same eagerness to always continue learning, whether you're in the beginning level and going to intermediate, and from intermediate to advanced, or from advanced to high advanced. That concept of continuous growing, if it's happening to a PhD person,
Yeah,
is going to
yeah.
happen to them as well. So that's something that to me is really cool to kind of like connect with then and now. I'm always going to be an English language learner. So I think that there is identity, there is pride, and there is an understanding that there is a journey that led me here, which was not easy, because oftentimes people with those identities don't have the opportunity to get a doctorate, and that's a problem.
Yeah.
And that's a problem.
You used two words that I really liked about being an English language learner, and that's a term, by the way, that as you know, is one that lots of us question, including myself. Is that the right term? Is there another term? Is it multilingual learner? Another conversation for another time. But I love how you call it grounding and humbling, and I love it how you mention the sort of informal language versus the academic language, and the opportunity to learn academic language as sort of a gift, as something you can learn, and also a professor in this case who understands that you have the potential, that your language is not a barrier, that if provided the key to that academic language, you're going to have both. You're going to have the experience, the creativity, and also the academic language that you can use. And I, as somebody who learned Spanish mostly in school and traveling a little bit, and learning specialized English, I completely understand what you're saying there. So I love that description of being an English learner. Um, and the other thing, we talked a little bit about your teachers, those invisible heroes, as you talked earlier, about how they kind of stoked your motivation and helped you through difficult times. You also credit a lot of your success to the support that your community granted you. But even with that support, as you've kind of alluded to, you struggle to access higher education opportunities. And you just mentioned that it's a problem that a lot of students in your position cannot get to where you've gone. Um, Talk with us about how community support is so important for students with this incredible potential, but so many barriers to overcome, particularly when it comes to dealing with that, that again, it's that trauma that many students have experienced. And maybe ground that question, what you just mentioned, which is that it's a problem that a lot of students cannot access what you accessed.
That's incredible, because whenever I think about oftentimes the places where I'm in, there is always this idea: do I belong here? I go into a master's program and I'm like, oh my goodness, can I write? Then I go into a PhD program and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm the only one that looks like this. And then I see another one that looks like me and I'm like, oh yes, let's go. There's a few of us. And then I think on the understanding that in community, there are shared experiences allowed me to understand that being the only one was problematic. So I started looking for the other ones that had similar experiences across cultures and understanding their specific experiences that got them to where they're at. Because, for example, I have met so many people who are English learners from Iran, people who are English learners from Ghana, people who are English learners from Kenya or from Costa Rica. And I think that understanding that background has enriched my own understanding of English lingua franca and understanding how it's utilized throughout the world, and how here now we have the ability to be able to educate through language. So I think that for me, creating community right away at an institution of higher education, where again, giving my background, giving the sentiments of rejection that I had, giving the sentiments of discrimination by being undocumented. And then all of a sudden I make it to a university. Are you kidding me? Like, are you kidding me? So of course I felt like I didn't belong. Of course I felt like I was not supposed to be there.
Yeah.
How am I going to financially pay for all of this while still being undocumented and unable to work? So I think that for me, creating community was a matter of taking care of my mental well-being, was a matter of finding systems of support that could speak louder than the imposter syndrome, that could be there for me whenever even the echo was telling me I couldn't do it, even whenever silence was telling me you can no longer, like, you're not capable. Like, I needed to have voices that could empower me, and those voices were voices in my community. There were the voices of profesoras, of profesores. There were the voices of la sobadora, that, the lady that would massage me after I would get hurt from a soccer game, and she would be sharing, her Asian wisdom. And I valued that, because I understood that an 80-year-old woman had wisdom in her. And that was someone in my community. Whenever I went to a restaurant and I interacted with somebody and I learned from their experiences, I I think that understanding that I never got away from my community, that I am my community, that I represent my community, took care of my mental well-being, that I was not alone. But at the same time, it built a family away from family. It built a family away from home, because my mother wasn't there, my father wasn't there, my stepdad, my sister. So I think that understanding that I had friends, that I had colleagues, um, really quickly that evolved into a network that provided opportunities professionally, academically, and personally. So I think that being surrounded by community is what got me here, because I am not the result of egocentrism. I'm the result of community.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great. I mean, one thing that you said that I'll just highlight, I love, I was thinking the whole time that you were speaking about that expression, imposter syndrome, right? And what you said was the community, the voice of the community speaks louder than the voice of imposter syndrome. I thought that was really well said, and something that we can all learn from. And again, when you began talking about that, you talked about how you sought it out, like you looked for it. You knew that it was something that you needed, but it wasn't necessarily people who are sort of exactly like you, who'd done the same exact thing, but people in that community who have experienced different things. And that's a great way to sort of create diverse communities, right? With people from different experiences. And we're going to learn a lot from each other that way. I think that was really well said. All right, so let's talk. I want to talk about what you're doing now, because we kind of just went through a very sort of short version of your trajectory from when you were young to where you are now, and this is the real. I mean, that's all really interesting to me, but this is the part that I'm really interested in hearing a little bit more about. So you founded Dr. Zelaya Educational Consulting LLC, which seeks to inspire and empower families and communities to experience the power of higher education. So much needed right now, as we've just discussed. Um, More importantly, your company represents life efforts as well as the desire to provide your daughter the life you were not able to enjoy as a child. So you're bringing this right back to your family. Um, we have a lot of great people involved in this community of work, and this ELL community or multilingual community, whatever you call it. Many of whom I've interviewed on the podcast, who are doing amazing things. But this is really personal for you. Um, Talk with us about how you hope your work will create a lasting impact, and how you're collaborating with others in the field to make it happen.
I seek to be a messenger. I seek to be a messenger that communicates information holistically, one that is able to meet with a student that that simply by saying, my name is José Luis Zelaya, soy hondureño, and just by sharing a few identifiers that they immediately can identify with. Because oftentimes, whenever speakers or whenever educators don't come from the backgrounds that the students come from, that lack of representation is problematic. It's problematic. And although we need all the support in the world, we also need the proper representation. So I think that the right representation for not only myself, but for English learners around the nation. I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who has had the story that I have had. That there are other dreamers who have masters, who have medical degrees, who have law degrees. I think it's important for educational leaders to identify those models and to be able to bring them into the educational system for students to see themselves in reflected in them as educators continue to educate and to prepare them to succeed academically. But I think that for me, whenever I think about the work that I seek to do, I come from a background of motivational speaking. I come from a background of activism and advocacy. I have always utilized speaking as a sense of empowerment. In fact, it's really interesting because I feel that speaking, kind of like the story of Samson, like if I don't speak, I feel like my hair is being cut off. Like that's all I can do. And if I don't share my heart, I'm shaving my head off. So for me, I understand that there is power in speaking, that there is power in our stories. So whenever I said I'm gonna finish the PhD, what is the best thing that I can give to my community? I look back into my experience and I looked into my community work. I looked into the public speaking, and I said I want to go into educational consulting because a lot of the networks and a lot of the relationships that I had already built with the school districts that I had been speaking for wanted more. They said, okay, you can speak, your story is great, but can you do more? Can you come in and meet with them one-on-one? Can you do this? Can you do that? And that led to curriculum, programming, trainings, and different types of other services. So it evolved into what is becoming. But of course, this is where my passion is.
Yeah, what a beautiful story as well. I love how this ties all together. I mean, you're doing this speaking to hope to motivate others and to hope to inspire them based on what you have experienced in your own life, and that using speaking, the power of speaking, and that gift that you have, and it is a gift. I mean, again, I've seen your talks, and 100% you have that gift, and then to be able to take that to the next level and to not only inspire and motivate, but to actually be a part of the change, go into schools and embed this into curriculum, speak with students on a one-to-one personal level. I think that's really amazing, and I think it's a great example of the power of what you're mentioning, of speaking, of telling your story, because it seems that the sort of the evolution of your organization is a result of that, right? Of that speaking and that desire to motivate and inspire others.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really impressive. So wrapping up here, a couple more questions for you. Clearly, yours is largely a story of incredible persistence in the face of adversity. We talked about the strategic planning that you needed to do to get to where you wanted to go from day one, from the day that you left Honduras to now. What advice would you give to listeners who work with students who are facing similar challenges, but maybe haven't developed that motivation that you clearly had at a very young age?
One of my greatest quotes or things that I gather from is a concept that uh, we often misplan we often misplan what we are capable of doing in 10 years, and we believe that we can overplan in 1 year. So oftentimes we have this mentality that let me think short term because that's all what we can think of. Let me think what I can do in 6 months. Let me think what I can do in 1 year. But as somebody who strategically crafted this, I created this. Of course, you know, my family was there, my community was there, but I put it on paper. Before it happened, I shared the plan with people and people thought it was crazy. People were saying, why do you think you can do this? Who do you think you are? I put it on paper and I shared it with people and people said, hey, what do you need? Because I can help you get there. And they helped me get there faster. So because I put it on paper, I was able to show it. And whenever I was able to show it, people were able to believe me more. So for those people that have ideas, or whether it's, you know, whether it's an educator that is thinking about doing a master's, and they're thinking, well, a master's, I don't have the ability because it's going to take me longer. It's fine. You don't have to finish in 2 years. Maybe it'll take you 5 years, but at the end of the 5 years, you're going to get a master's. And the same thing with the principal who's thinking about doing a PhD and who's thinking, I don't have the time to do a PhD in 4 years. Well, let it take 8 years. Let it take 10 years. But at the end of the 10 years, you're going to be able to be in a position of leadership to be able to create a higher impact. And I think that is that long-term mentality that got me here. It was understand, like, for example, the things that I am doing now, surrounding myself with people who are smarter than I am, because in the company, we're a team. And the quality of the services that we do are the result of the team. And
Mm-hmm.
we have experts in the team. So whenever I think about 10 years from now, I'm surrounding myself today with the people that I want to be present 10 years from now, because I want to create the long-term impact. And the long-term impact is that I seek to return back to the same trash fields that I come from and to be able to clean them up and turn them into schools. And that's my dream. So I think that not only did I live it, but I continue to live it, because as the future continues to go on, I have long-term visions. So that's what my piece of 2 cents would be. That it's about a long-term plan and not just a short-term one.
Yeah, it's another great point. You know, so much of what school is about is a due date that's next week or next week or next semester, or you graduate in 4 years. You know, maybe we need to spend more time thinking about what your future looks like in 10 years. And speaking of that future, I look forward to reconnecting with you in 10 years and seeing that dream that you have become a reality, because I get the sense that if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be someone like you. So I love that mentality and that viewpoint. Of course, that's going to take a community and a team that you're already starting to build out now, and I give you a lot of credit for doing it. So as we wrap up, two more questions for you. One is, I wanted to ask you, given just your perspective and your experience, I'm wondering who you look to as a leader in the field who inspires you right now, and that you think others could learn from.
You know, it's fascinating because whenever I have always looked for this person to look for. I have always thought about who can I look at a national level and say, wow, like I want to model my work after this person. And especially within the field of education, I am I have high admiration for the work that Dr. Cardona, the current Secretary of Education, is doing, because I think that the work that he's doing is speaking about social emotional learning, newcomers, dreamers, DACA recipients, is so important in the nation, not only to be a conversation inside of a closed doors, but to be brought to the national front line is so important. So to be able to see him do that gives me hope for the future, to understand that as he created a team, he brought dreamers with him, and he brought people that are from the ground, people that are in the grassroots, and that inspires me, because I understand that as he continues to do work, that that triggering effect would then impact English language learners, would impact students who just recently arrived in the country, and that hopefully more policy at the national level can provide more opportunities for institutions of higher education for the same students that currently are graduating high school, but the states barred them from accessing institutions of higher ed. So I think that having that national leader, it's important for national policy change.
Yeah, you talked about the importance of having people who represent the populations that we're serving in classrooms. Well, how great is it to have someone who's, leading the nation in this? Have to ask, is that something that you see yourself aspiring to do someday?
Hands down, hands down. But in Honduras, and I don't know how. I don't know how. Um, God is the architect of my own destiny, and I would see how life continues to evolve. But what I do know is that I seek to work and to continue to collaborate and serve the United States, because I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to everything that the United States has given to me, that I believe that the American dream is one that it's international. It's one that goes across borders to be able to help our brothers and sisters. It's just that to me, it just happens to be my native family. So in the future, that's my dream, to be able to work within the department, to be able to build schools across the nation.
Well, I'd love to see it. And by you helping Honduras, you're helping the international community. You're helping our country, and I think that's just something that we need to be able to see more clearly as a country that right now is a little too divided. But you bring up some really good points. Boy, I wish we had another 2 hours. Maybe we can do a follow up. But between now and then, how can people learn more about the work you're doing, Dr. Zelaya? Because there's an incredible amount of resources out there of yours, and I really enjoyed looking at all of it, from the videos to the reading before we met. But what's the best place that people can go to learn more about you?
Of course. Thank you. And thank you very much for the opportunity to be able to share my experiences and to be able to connect with your audience. And I'm eager to connect. I'm eager to serve. I'm here to be a resource, and to be able to also see our communities experience that change, that generational impact of higher education. And they can contact me at Jose Luis at drcelaya.com, or they can just check out the website as well as drcelaya.com. And I'm also on social media on every platform, as Dr. Zelaya Speaks. But I'm eager to connect, eager to serve, and be here.
Great. Well, we will put up all of those links on our show notes, as well as the blog post that we'll put up with this episode. You can find that as always at elevationeducation.com/ELL community. Dr. Jose Luis Zelaya, it has been an absolute pleasure catching up with you. I had been anticipating and looking forward to this interview for a long time, and it did not disappoint. Thank you so much.
My honor. Thank you.